Howdy hi everyone! This is Fiona Apollo and I do art commentary. Today I wanted to chat about a popular art challenge called Blacktober, and I wanted to talk about it specifically as a gateway into the culture surrounding marginalised groups within online art spaces who use their works to rally together and celebrate themselves basically by taking existing properties and recreating them with their own likeness in mind. The reason I want to put a bit of a spotlight on Blacktober is because, well, it's October, you know, 'tis the season, but also as an art challenge, it's one of the highest profile of its type, and I wanted to use it as this kind of case study for looking into what these kind of socio-political art challenges represent, why people do them, what the drawbacks may be, and so on. The first thing I want to get out of the way with this discussion before anything else is that people who partake in Blacktober are far from the only people who do this in some kind of way. Everyone who indulges in art or fandom does this to an extent, literally everyone. I'm in the alphabet mafia, and I do this myself all the time with queer headcanons. The only difference here is more so the visuals. I personally really like seeing all the Blacktober art rolling in because it's just a chance to see people really show off their creative skills while also undertaking a bit of self-love along the way. And it reminds me a lot of how hyped up people get when Pride Month rolls around. I mean, from where I've been watching, it's just a group of people having wholesome fun and finding others like them. What's wrong with that? Not only that, as an artist, I see it as a way to kick my own butt into gear about giving equal attention to all of the different characters I create, and not just the black characters either, as well as how to draw, characterize, and depict them in a way that is honest and respectful, because yeah, we might think we're doing that anyway, I know what's respectful and what isn't, but being able to pick up on certain nuances and subtleties can be really helpful. There's a lot you can learn from challenges like these, and they come with a lot of benefits to everyone, not just one specific group. That said, we are also going to look into the backlash Blacktober has received, and some of it is pretty bad. I will just preemptively warn you if that is something you may find to be triggering. We are going to have some discussions about racism and general bigotry, because unfortunately, when you're a part of a marginalised group, that is something that comes with the territory, and personally speaking, not taking that into account doesn't really do much in the way of validating how the people affected might feel about it. And I think that's quite an important angle to consider here, because we're talking about people, not just art. In an ideal world, we would be able to ignore that aspect of things, but as it stands, I don't feel like I can do that. I've been mulling it over for quite some time now as to whether or not I really wanted to do a video like this, and the conclusion I came to is that when it comes to Blacktober, BLM, and other such movements like that, if it's only the affected people speaking on certain issues, then it's kind of reinforcing the problem of them only being able to rely on themselves for support, which I don't think is fair at all, and defeats the purpose of sharing around all those sentiments of allyship or whatever. People feeling like they have no support system outside of themselves sounds worse to me than the fear of potentially speaking out of turn and making a fool out of yourself. I have put out a few posts asking people and getting a feel for how they view the challenge in general, and I've also been trying to make note of black creators' attitudes especially in regards to it. Unfortunately, I'm not going to read any out because I got substantially more responses than last time, and some are still dripping through as I write the script. So instead, I'm going to leave a link to both the Twitter and community posts I made if you want to check out the responses for yourself. Also, keep in mind, of course, I am one person and I'm not perfect. So if you have any thoughts about anything I discuss here, please let me know in the comments. Any feedback is greatly appreciated. Alright, with that said, if you like this video, please don't forget to like and subscribe. It makes me very, very happy when you do that. Please note that unless stated otherwise, a lot of thoughts and perspectives expressed in my videos are purely speculative. It is up to you as the viewer to form and express your own opinions regarding these subjects, and be sure to always try to listen to multiple people on the matter. Let's get to it! Part 1. What is Blacktober? Blacktober is a month-long art challenge with the aim of celebrating POC characters either by creating fan art of existing ones in shows, movies, or games, or alternatively taking non-POC existing characters and franchises and reimagining them as a different race. The official prompt list provides a list of words and phrases for people to use. Oftentimes the characters chosen will either be fan favourites of POC communities, or they can be characters that people interpret as having canonical connections to specific groups. Sometimes these characters can also be non-human with no canonical race or ethnicity, effectively making them a blank slate. This event also happens to fall on Black History Month here in the UK, so it's a good way for POC creators here to feel emboldened to embrace their identities during a month that encourages support for them. So like last time, I put out a post and asked what people's thoughts were on the subject. There was a good variation of opinions and perspectives surrounding this, so I'm going to go over the more positive and then mixed views in this section before getting to the more touchy ones in the next. The first general consensus I noted, and this was pretty much a given I think, was that POC creators really enjoyed seeing their feeds filled with characters that looked like them. Sometimes people aren't asking for the world and literally just want a cute or badass character with a different skin tone or visibly non-European facial features, that's it. Done. End of discussion. Oh, if only, right? Things would be so much more simple if that was the end of it. But no, this frankly stems from the fact that there just simply isn't enough representation in media. There are a lot more POC characters now than there used to be, and that goes the same for other minorities like queer characters as well, but they are still a minority in the sense that seeing them in media, much less see them be important to the story, can still come as a surprise to the audience, especially when they're not portrayed to be a stereotype. Not only that, having a challenge like this for black characters can also encourage people of other groups to interpret characters that they want to see as well. A couple of Latina artists also gave their thoughts about how this challenge makes them want to draw more characters as a way of embracing their identity as well. Another factor to this was that there were a few mentions of being able to see all the different character design ideas, especially in regards to the way that people would interpret certain features. And honestly, this is my favourite aspect of this. Say for example, you were to reimagine a human Medusa as someone with an afro hair type. Regular Medusa has snakes for hair, so one way to do it would be to give her a hair type that can be manipulated and shaped, similarly for example to the Ivorian artist Letitia Key, who uses her own hair to make temporary sculptures. It's things like that which are often praised when it comes to Blacktober because it helps provide a fresh and interesting take on how certain features that we normally wouldn't think of could be reinterpreted. And that's part of what I love about it personally. In contrast to the topic of representation, I've seen a fair few people on both sides of the fence comment that they aren't particularly thrilled that skin colour is often the defining attribute of the challenge, rather than whether or not the character is meaningful either culturally or otherwise outside of that one factor. So first off for this point, a standalone illustration of Hatsune Miku having Kenyan heritage by an artist who also has Kenyan heritage is not really a cause for uproar, and I don't think that's the point of people's arguments on this. Sometimes a spade is just a spade, and a simple drawing is just a simple drawing, you know? But also, I think this perspective can play into people's need to reimagine characters who actually contribute to the story they come from, because if you look at side characters or background characters in a lot of shows, especially in cartoons, these are a lot more likely to be POC as opposed to the main cast. So I can understand it from that angle because while yes, these side characters being POC more or less ticks that one box of having existed in a piece of media, they're also not really all that important and are pretty easy for people to ignore or pretend don't exist. A number of POC creators spoke on this too and essentially corroborated that they often find the concept of Blacktober a bit weird in that sense. A few people have expressed that skin colour and ethnicity can be very significant aspects to certain characters, and just switching those around can be a bit jarring. As well as a reinforcement of the sentiment of having POC versions of characters not be fully considered realised characters in their own right. This perspective kind of makes me think of what Stan Lee, the creator of Marvel Comics, said about Peter Parker and Miles Morales both being Spider-Man. Stan's specific words were, "I wouldn't mind if Peter Parker had originally been black, a Latino, an Indian, or anything else, that he stay that way, but we originally made him white. I don't see any reason to change that. It has nothing to do with being anti-gay or anti-black or anti-Latino or anything like that. Latino characters should stay Latino. The Black Panther should certainly not be Swiss. I just see no reason to change that which has already been established when it's so easy to add new characters. I say create new characters the way you want to. Hell, I'll do it myself." This can also make sense for anime characters in some capacity, which tends to be a high talking point surrounding Blacktober, for better or for worse. I don't personally think a lot of anime characters in modern settings who don't have a visibly close connection to Japanese culture should be the focus of this point, because depending on the story, them being Japanese isn't really that relevant. But characters in time period focused anime like Demon Slayer for example being changed to a different race can obviously leave a few people confused as to why that choice was made. In this case, context can be pretty important. Moving on, a few people questioned why this challenge was needed at all. Why can't people just celebrate diverse characters all year round? Why do we need to contain it to one month? And I'm going to answer this with the same answer I typically give when people ask these exact same questions as to why we still have Pride Month. Literally no one on earth is saying that you can't only be proud of being a minority or showing support for them for a certain amount of time. But if we don't have these periodic reminders that minority people exist and often do not have the same freedoms and liberties as other people, then the vast majority will be more inclined to ignore us and our needs. This phrase is often used pretty negatively, but I think it sums up my thoughts on it pretty well. The baby who cries the loudest gets the bottle. If we don't kick up a fuss, a lot of people will be all too happy to continue being complacent as if everything is fine and we don't need to change the status quo. But there are, in fact, a lot of things that still need changing, and not acknowledging that fact can be pretty detrimental. All in all, I think a lot of us would be really happy for these events to not be needed, but until things get better, as far as I'm concerned, they are still very much relevant for some groups. In the spirit of that, there is one more thing I saw mentioned, and that was the aspect of performative activism. If you don't know what performative activism is, it's basically when you only show any kind of support for something when it's convenient and you stand to benefit something, rather than supporting a cause because it falls in line with your own personal set of morals. It's a bit like how certain corporations will have their own floats during Pride Month, because these days, depending on where you live of course, inclusivity brings in customers. I say this is a weird one though, because strictly speaking, sometimes you truly won't know whether someone is only posting POC characters during Blacktober because they think it will benefit them, or because they saw all the art circulating and just got inspired. We need to remember that the interpersonal undertones of Blacktober stem from the way that black people are treated in places like America, and other parts of the world don't really have the same kind of awareness surrounding that for them to realise how big of an issue it is to simply see depictions of POC characters until they notice others talking about it. So this one I'm on the fence about, honestly. So those were the main points I saw people give regarding their general thoughts on the challenge, so let's move on to the tougher part of the discussion. Part 2, the backlash. So just to warn you again, we will be discussing harassment and racism within this section, so if you want to skip this part, I'll leave a timestamp to the final section both on screen and in the description. So a big factor with Blacktober that gets brought up every year without fail, and is often something that discourages people from taking part, is the potential to be more or less mercilessly harassed by internet trolls, and sometimes by people who just don't understand the point of the challenge. Now, no matter what group you're a part of, the problem with trolls is that there is no solid way to really combat them, and it can be very draining both mentally and emotionally seeing them pop up constantly and seemingly without an end to it, and having to explain yourself over and over and over when it feels like you've done nothing wrong. A lot of the time, it's not even that they have a huge vendetta against you, it's more the case that they just want to be a nuisance for their own entertainment. But even still, that doesn't take away from how damaging they can be sometimes to an artist's confidence, especially if you're only small. And this can cause people to withdraw certain pieces and even parts of themselves from the public eye, because they just don't want to put up with it, and honestly, who can blame them? The number of marginalised artists I've seen who get dogpiled on with needless comments about why they do what they do, being told they are wrong or ugly or stupid, spreading misinformation, people spamming slurs, and even false reporting would understandably be enough to make anyone think twice about partaking in challenges like Blacktober. Unfortunately though, because of this, it can also lead some artists to becoming hyper-defensive of their art and themselves, which is often then used against them as a way to frame them as being standoffish and catty towards everyone. Effectively, this can be a way for trolls to trick people into falling into the angry black person stereotype. It's a manipulation tactic, and oftentimes it's quite a successful one, because after a certain point of being patient and explaining yourself calmly for the millionth time, who wouldn't be pushed to start telling everyone to f*** off when that patience and calm demeanour clearly isn't working? And it will hardly ever work, because the people causing all that harassment want you to get mad and won't stop until you blow up at them so that they can turn it around on you. So what happens when people do stick up for themselves and start to become defensive of their art in particular, which these artists will often see as an expression of their identity? Well, then the trolls will go after the art. Now, personally, as someone who has had bullies rip up their drawings when I was younger, one good thing about digital art is that the original drawing will always exist and is essentially untouchable in some form, but a very big downside as well is that it's also much easier for others to create copies of your work and mess with it in some pretty horrible ways. And there's no better example of this when it comes to Blacktober than whitewashing. Whitewashing as an overall concept is when a character who is typically non-white is made to have either physical features, mannerisms, or cultural backgrounds altered to suit a more Americanized standard. And I say Americanized because, well, the concept of a homogenized white culture isn't really a thing in Europe. Europe is comprised of 44 countries, and to say that all of those countries share the same monolithic culture is pretty similar to if you said the exact same thing about the continent of Africa, despite it being comprised of 54 countries. Obviously, when it comes to physical appearance, this can hark back to European beauty standards, but white and black culture are not quite as black and white as they are in the States. But I digress, this is a very prevalent issue online and it can cause a lot of distress. There are a lot of cases of even popular artists getting their works whitewashed by people. This happened recently to White Manga, who is a prominent artist in online art communities and who has also created several manga stories, one of which has a black female protagonist. The main protagonist of the manga Clock Strikers ended up getting whitewashed online by these trolls. And to add on to that even more, it's not always just POC creators who get targeted for these things either, it seems. Pretty much any POC character is a target, it feels like, because the goal is ultimately the same, which is to suppress any kind of representation for non-white creators. One of my own characters from my webcomic got whitewashed as well quite some time ago now. I considered doing a video on it back then, but ultimately decided against it. Now, a defense that is used when it comes to this kind of thing is that some will insist that in of itself, Blacktober is an event focused on race-washing characters of other cultures, and as we touched on before, this argument can hold some weight to an extent when it comes to characters like the Demon Slayer cast, or another example can be the family in the comedy Fresh Off the Boat, as the premise is showcasing a specifically Asian American household. In that specific instance, it would be viewed as an erasure of another form of representation which is also lacking in media. There is a lot to unpack when it comes to talking about why it's okay for one group to do this and not the other, and a lot of it, from what I've observed, mostly comes down to people trying to advocate for this sense of equivalence. But ultimately, the basic fact is that there are more white characters in media than there are POC, and changing a few, temporarily I might add, will not make a dent in those numbers. So this might be a small tangent, but looking at all the outrage about the new Little Mermaid film, for example, and how people are mad about how it seems to be mostly redheads that are being race swapped in different iterations of stories, it made me want to do some digging into how many redheads exactly are in media, considering, you know, they are actually one of the rarest hair types in the world, and yet it feels like there are so many on TV. And what I found out was that the redhead population in the US is about 1 to 2%, and yet the percentage of redheads in US commercials, for example, is about 30%. Are people going around saying that redheads are overrepresented in media? Not really, because media is fiction. Also, mermaids aren't real. We can make them green if we want to. As far as I'm concerned, a standalone retelling of a centuries-old tale is not going to cause the canonical depictions of these characters to disintegrate, and if the story itself does not have a character's race or ethnicity at the forefront of its storytelling, I really don't see the problem. If it makes you so angry, Disney doesn't actually own the original tale of The Little Mermaid, so you can actually just make your own, or just go watch the animated film. It's still around. They haven't got rid of it. This of course would be different if the creators taking part in this challenge were claiming to fix these characters by swapping their races around, but I'm not going to go very deep into this one as I feel like it's another specific discussion for another time. Fixing in of itself is a whole can of worms when it comes to this topic because trolls will often use it in conjunction with whitewashing as a way to get under people's skin. I'll be honest, for every 10 cases of art fixing when it comes to another character's race, about 9 times out of 10 it will be a troll picking on a marginalised artist, and then maybe 1 will be the other way around. Unless people are specifically claiming that POC characters are superior, such as the case with Z-Fix's art a while back, this should not be taken as permission to retaliate and do the same to them in turn. So with all of that said, let's move on to our final section. Part 3, what can we do? Looking at what we have spoken about here, it's really up to you as a person whether you feel it necessary to look into Blacktober further and the artists who partake in it. Ultimately, the whole shebang with this challenge is that people literally just want to make characters who look like them, and while also using such works to make a statement. It's a fun art challenge, and that really should be all there is to it, but sometimes things can get a bit tangled, especially on places like Twitter. I think we all know that by now. As stated before, while I'm not black myself, this monthly event shows a lot of symbolic similarities to Pride in my mind, which is why I use that as an example in places, but it's also just nice to see people embrace themselves. There are always going to be small subsections of people who make outsiders question certain things about what's going on, and contrastingly, there will always be those who want to ruin a good thing. But it's important to remember that these will often be vocal minorities, and they shouldn't shape your perception of the entire group. If you want to take a look further into the challenge as an artist and supporter, some things you can do include taking the time to study different POC features and cultures in your art. Learn how to draw different face shapes, nose shapes, eye shapes, learn how to properly do skin tones, take a look at what clothes, objects, and patterns are popular from certain countries and cultures, look into certain mannerisms they may use, the list goes on. These can be especially helpful if you like making original characters. If you want to support other artists, look around for some whose art you might really like, and this doesn't necessarily have to be art focused on POC characters, since for some that's not always the focus of their works. Comment on it, share it, you know, the usual. And something I think is especially important if you want to support people in general, don't claim to be colourblind. The concept of being colorblind, I think, is rooted in good faith oftentimes, and for a lot of people it basically means that you treat everyone the same, but people will have experiences purely due to the fact that they are part of a certain group, and this choice of wording can sometimes come across like that experience isn't worth acknowledging or empathizing with. Some people's identities are important to them, and this shouldn't be disregarded. I know that some artists genuinely worry about stepping out of their comfort zone when trying to diversify their artworks, not because they don't want to, but because they don't want to give off the wrong impression should something be off, and I get that. You don't want to make it seem like you're making certain characters look worse on purpose, but trust me, people will be able to tell when you have good or bad intentions, and when you are just inexperienced at drawing a certain thing. When we're not exposed to something all the time, it's natural to not be as well versed in portraying it, but that's why as artists we are constantly improving and learning. Just be kind, be considerate, and be receptive to feedback. And above all, remember that these challenges are meant to be about appreciating good art from people who deserve more praise, finding new artists to interact with, and having fun while doing so. Alright, I think that's it from me. I'm done preaching. I'm tired. Thank you so much for watching, and if you like this video, please be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. I have a couple of videos coming up where I'm collabing with a couple of fellow creator buddies, both for Halloween and for the channel's 2-year anniversary, so if you're interested in those, please stick around and hit the bell. Stay safe everyone, and I will see you very, very soon. Bye!